36 minutes. I'll babble on for a good 6 minutes and I'll start reading Fellowship of the Ring. Right. So I'm gonna keep saying this. I don't mean to what? I don't mean to, like, even though at the end of the day, yeah, Hollywood is the best of the best. Here's the thing though. The reason why all these actors are in Hollywood is because they have no choice. If they want to get paid their millions, if they want to make a lot of money, and they want to be famous, they have no choice but to be in the Hollywood system, as Hollywood is the best of the best, obviously. There's a catch though. Even though you see these celebrities and you see their glamorous life, they're rich, they're famous, that comes at a price, man. There's no such thing as free money in Hollywood. There's no such thing as free money in Hollywood. In Hollywood, if you want to be famous and rich, you gotta pay it. You gotta what? You have to sell your soul and you have to pay a price, man. I don't mean to expose Hollywood like that, man. Like, look, man. To all you guys who want to be in Hollywood, I'm just saying you can try and get into the Hollywood system all you want. I'm just saying if you want to be in the Hollywood system, you have to pay a price to be rich, man. There's no such thing as free money in this world, right? Hence why all the Hollywood actors are gonna so badly want to work for my company, because these actors don't have to pay any price to be in my movie, because I'm a clean, good business person. I'm not a dirty businessman. And there's nothing worse than being a dirty businessman. No. Hence why all these actors are going to beg their ass off, because there's no such thing as freedom in Hollywood. Whereas for my company, you're free. Whereas Victoria Justice, I guarantee you, her one dream is to get out of that Hollywood system. She regrets selling, obviously. She sold her soul for fame and fortune. Obviously, Victoria Justice sold her soul. You compare VJ, you compare the life of VJ, compare the life of Ivan Omer, you see a huge contrast. VJ sold her soul. Yeah, she's rich and famous, but the mess happened in Hollywood. She paid a price. She's what? She's pretty much what? She's a slutty whore. I don't mean to be rude. Because she's a porn star, she's pretty much what? A whore. She's a hoe, obviously. You see the price that Victoria Justice paid. Yeah, she's rich, but she's miserable because she doesn't have her freedom. Hence why she cries every night, because she regrets selling, obviously. She can't see me, obviously. At the same time, she knows she got duped and she regrets selling, obviously. I wish I didn't sell. Because Ivan Omer, even though he's poor, he's free. Which is an amazing feeling. You have no idea how amazing it feels to be free, obviously. Right? In other words, all the people in the world who are free, who aren't rich, they all wish they could be rich, obviously, because having a lot of money is nice, but they know to be rich, it comes at a price. You have to sell your soul for that. Whereas all the Hollywood actors, their dream is to get their freedom, obviously. They have the money, obviously, which is nice. They're living a lavish life, but a lot of them are very miserable and stressed out because they're not free. They sold their soul for fame and fortune. Hence, it came at a price, obviously. Hence, every celebrity's dream is to be rich and free, obviously. Every celebrity's dream is to get their freedom. Whereas every free person's dream is to be rich. But to be rich comes at a price in this world. You have to sell your soul to be rich. Obviously, right? Right? Whereas every rich person's dream is to be free. But in order to be free, you what? In order to get freedom in this world, you won't make any money, obviously. So it's either you're free and you're not rich, obviously, or you're very rich but you're not free, obviously. And no offense, I'd rather be free and not be rich than be rich and not be free, as freedom is worth a lot more than money. Take it from me right now. Even though I'm poor and the doors are all locked on me, it's an amazing feeling to be free, man. Having your freedom is such an amazing feeling, and it's worth a lot more than money. Believe me. Take this from me. Having your freedom is worth a lot more than having a lot of money. Having a lot of money is nice, but there's a saying in the Bible, what shall it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose his soul? There's nothing worse than having all this money and you sold your soul for fame and fortune, and you have all this money, but you're miserable, you're stressed out, you're depressed, because you sold your soul for fame and fortune. Obviously. Hence why I am VJ's last hope, obviously, for freedom, obviously. Because VJ's one wish is she wants to get her freedom with her husband, obviously. VJ's dying to get out of the Hollywood system, but it's too late. She's sold out, obviously. She's dying to get out of that Hollywood system. Whereas Ivan Omer is dying to be rich and get his freedom, obviously. Right? I want to be rich, but I also want to be free. I don't want to be rich and be a fucking dirty slave and sell my soul. No fucking way, man. As I want nothing to do with the Hollywood system. Take a look what happened to my wife about her sabotage career and the horror mess. That's how you know I want nothing to do with the Hollywood system. I want to be independent from Hollywood, as I want nothing to do with the Hollywood system. Believe me, I want nothing to do with the Hollywood system. I want to be independent from Hollywood, as I don't want to be in that wicked place. As no offense, Hollywood is what? Hollywood is Sin City, man. It's a wicked place. I want nothing to do with that system. The fact that the mess happened with my wife and they sabotaged her career and sabotaged results, that's how you know I want nothing to do with the Hollywood system. As Hollywood is not for me, man. Hence why I'm getting my wife out of that place, as I want nothing to do with that wicked system, man. Yeah. Right. But even then, I'm still a fan. I still enjoy Hollywood movies. I still love all the movies they put out. I'm more than happy to promote all their movies. Even though Hollywood is the Hollywood system is a wicked system, at the end of the day, what? If you want to make money in this world and be with the best of the best, you have to go to Hollywood, obviously. I'm just saying, if you take that path, you have to pay a price, obviously. But even then, I still love Hollywood movies. I still watch Hollywood movies. You know what I'm saying? I'm a huge fan of a lot of Hollywood movies. I'm more than happy to promote the movies because what? I'm a nice person, obviously. Now, enough of me babbling on. I only have a good 30 minutes left here. I'm going to continue my read-along of Fellowship of the Ring. Hence, you're fucking welcome to because of me, you get your freedom and you get to be rich with your wife, which is your one dream, obviously. It's because you sold out, you're a dirty fucking slave in Hollywood. Yeah. Okay, let me continue. I have 30 minutes left here, so I have to start reading here. Right. See, lads, he said, next time this young varmint sets foot on my land, you can eat him. Now see him off. They chased me all the way to the ferry. I have never got over the fright, though I dare say the beast knew their business and would not really have touched me, obviously. So Frodo's talking about his dealings with Farmer Mag and the dogs and all that stuff, right? Frodo says he's scared of Farmer Mag and he's scared of his dogs. Pippin laughed. Well, it's time you made it up, especially if you are coming back to live in Buckland. Old Maggot is really a stout fellow. If you leave his mushrooms alone, let's get into the lane and then we shan't be trespassing. If we meet him, I'll do the talking. He is a friend of Mary's, and I used to come here with him a good deal at one time. They went along the lane until they saw the thatched roofs of a large house and farm buildings peeping out among the trees ahead. The maggots and the pooty-foots of stock, and most of the inhabitants of the Marish were house dwellers, and his farm was stoutly built of brick and had a high wall all around it. There was a wide wooden gate opening out of the wall into the lane. Suddenly, as I drew near, a terrific baying and barking broke out, and a loud voice was heard shouting, Grip Fang, Wolf, come on, lads. Frodo and Sam stopped dead. But Pippin walked on a few paces. The gate opened, and 3 huge dogs came pelting out into the lane and dashed towards the travelers, barking fiercely. They took no notice of Pippin, but Sam shrank against the wall, while 2 wolfish-looking dogs sniffed at him suspiciously and snarled if he moved. The largest and most ferocious of the 3 halted in front of Frodo, bristling and growling. Again, this is not in the movie, right? In the movie, they mentioned Mr. Maggot's crops, but that's it. Frodo and them are passing through Mr. Maggot's crops, and then they hear this voice of Mr. Maggot, and they run away from Mr. Maggot. That's pretty much all you get in the movie. Whereas in the book, they actually meet Mr. Maggot, and they stay at his house and all that stuff. Right? The gate opened, and the huge dog came pelting out into the lane and dashed towards the travelers, barking fiercely. They took no notice of Pippin, but Sam shrank against the wall, while 2 wolfish-looking dogs sniffed at him suspiciously and snarled if he moved. The largest and most ferocious of the 3 halted in front of Frodo, bristling and growling. Through the gate there now appeared a broad, thick-set hobbit with a round red face. Hallo, hallo, and who may you be, and who may you be wanting, he asked. Good afternoon, Mr. Maggot, said Pippin. So we mean Mr. Maggot now, right? The farmer looked at him closely, obviously. Well, if it isn't Master Pippin, Mr. Peregrine Took, I should say, he cried, changing from a growl to a grin. So the hobbits obviously have some dealings with Mr. Maggot, obviously, right? They know him, obviously. It's a long time since I saw you round here. It's lucky for you that I know you. I was just going out to set my dogs on any strangers. There are some funny things going on today. Of course we do. Yet queer folk wandering in these parts at times. Too near the river, he said, shaking his head. But this fellow was the most outlandish I have ever set eyes on. He won't cross my land without leave a second time. Not if I can stop it. What fellow do you mean? Asked Pippin. Then you haven't seen him, said the farmer. He went up the lane towards the causeway not long while back. He was a funny customer and asking funny questions, but perhaps you'll come along inside and we'll pass the news more comfortable. I've a drop of good ale on tap, if you and your friends are willing, Mr. Took. It seemed plain that the farmer would tell them no more. if allowed to do it in his own time and fashion. So they all accept the invitation. What about the dogs? Asked Frodo, because Frodo's scared of the dogs, obviously. And that's why Frodo was reluctant to go in his house, because he's like, what about your dogs, I'm saying? Because Frodo had some bad dealings with the dog, with Mr. Maggott's dogs in the past, obviously. The farmer laughed. They won't harm you, not unless I tell them to. Here, Gripfang, heal, he cried, heal, Wolf, to the relief of Frodo and Sam. The dogs walked away and let them go free. Pippin introduced the other two to the farmer, Mr. Frodo Baggins. So Pippin knows Mr. Maggot, obviously, right? He said, you may not remember him, but he used to live at Brownie Hill. At the name Baggins, the farmer started and gave Frodo a sharp glance. For a moment, Frodo thought that the memory of stolen mushrooms had been aroused and that the dog would be told to see him off. But Farmer Maggot took him by the arm. Well, if that isn't queerer than ever, he exclaimed. Mr. Baggins, is it? Come inside, we must have a talk. They went into the farmer's kitchen, sat by the wide fireplace. Mrs. Maggot brought out beer in a huge jug, so Mr. Maggot has a wife, obviously, and filled 4 large mugs. It was a good brew, and Pippin found himself more than compensated for missing the golden perch. Sam sipped his beer suspiciously. He had a natural mistrust of the inhabitants of other parts of the Shire, and also he was not disposed to be quick friends with anyone who had beaten his master however long ago. After a few remarks about the weather and the agricultural prospects, which were no worse than usual, Farmer Maggot put down his mug and looked at them all in turn. Now, Mr. Peregrine, he said, where might you be coming from, and where might you be going to? Where are you coming to visit me? For if so, you have gone past my gate without my seeing you. Well, no, answered Pippin. To tell you the truth, since you have guessed it, we got into the lane from the other end. We have come over your fields, but that was quite by accident. We lost our way into the woods back near Woodhall, trying to take a shortcut to the ferry. Because remember how I said in this chapter, Frodo, Pippin, and Sam took the shortcut through the bogs, the bushes, and the fields, and they ended up on Mr. Maggot's farm, obviously. Hence why it's called a shortcut to mushrooms, obviously, right? So Mr. Maggot has mushrooms on his farm, pretty much. Shortcut to mushrooms, obviously. Well, no, answered Pippin. To tell you the truth, since you have guessed it, we got into the lane from the other end. We have come over your fields. But that was quite by accident. We lost our way in the woods back near Woodhall, trying to take a shortcut to the ferry. If you were in a hurry, the road would have served you better, said the farmer. But I wasn't worrying about that. You have to leave to walk over my land, if you have a mind. Mr. Peregrine and you, Mr. Baggins, though I dare say you still like mushrooms, he laughed. Ah, yes, I recognize the name. I recollect the time when young Frodo Baggins was one of the worst young rascals of Buckland, but it wasn't mushrooms I was thinking of. I had just heard the name Baggins before you turned up. What do you think that funny customer asked me? They waited anxiously for him to go on. Well, the farmer continued, approaching his point with slow relish, he came riding on a big black horse in at the gate, which happened to be open, and right up to my door, all black he was himself, too uncloaked and hooded up, as if he did not want to be known. Now, what in the Shire can he want? I thought to myself. We don't see many of the big folk over the border. And anyway, so Mr. Maggot's farm is like the border of pretty much the border of the Shire, pretty much, right? Remember how in the movie, Sam is like, if I take one more step, this will be the farthest place from home I've ever been, because now they're crossing the border, leaving the borders of the Shire. So Mr. Maggot's farm is like pretty much among the border of the Shire, obviously, because Frodo and them are still within the borders of the Shire. They haven't left the borders of the Shire yet, obviously, right? They waited actually for him to go on, while the farmer continued, approaching his point with slow relish. He came riding on a big black horse in at the gate, which happened to be open, and right up to my door. All black he was himself, too, and cloaked and hooded up, as if he did not want to be known. Now what in the Shire can he want? I thought to myself. We don't see many of the big folk over the border, and anyway, I had never heard of any like this black fellow. Good day to you, I says, going out to him. This lane don't lead anywhere, and wherever you may be going, your quickest way will be back to the road. I didn't like the looks of him, and then when Grit came out, he took one sniff and let out a yelp, as if he had been stung. He put out his tail and bolted off howling. The black fellow sat quite still. I come from yonder, he said, slow and stiff-like, pointing back west over my fields. If you please. Have you seen Baggins? He asked in a queer voice, and bent down towards me. I could see any face, for his hood fell down so low, and I felt sort of a shiver down my back, but I did not see why he should come riding over my land so bold. Be off, I said. There are no Bagginses here. You're in the wrong part of the Shire. You had better go back west to Hobbiton, where you can go by road this time. Baggins has left, he answered in a whisper. He is coming. He is not far away. I wish to find him. If he passes, will you tell me? I will come back with gold. No, you won't, I said. You'll go back where you are belong double quick. I give you 1 minute before I call all my dogs. He gave a sort of hiss. It might have been laughing, and it might not. Then he spurred his great horse right at me, and I jumped out of the way, only just in time. I called the dogs, but he swung off and rode through the gate and up the lane towards a causeway like a bolt of thunder. What do you think of that? Frodo sat for a moment looking at the fire, but his only thought was how on earth would they reach the ferry. I don't know what to think, he said at last. Then I'll tell you what to think, said Maggot. You should never have gone mixing yourself up with Hobbiton folk, Mr. Frodo. Folk are queer up there. Sam stirred in his chair and looked at the farmer with an unfriendly eye. But you were always a reckless lad. When I heard you had left the Brandybucks and gone off to that old Mr. Bilbo, I said that you were going to find trouble. Mark my words, this all comes of those strange doings of Mr. Bilbo's. His money was got in some strange fashion in foreign parts, they say. Maybe there is some that want to know what has become of the gold and jewels that he buried in the hill of Hobbiton, as I hear. Let's see, right? 4 more pages and I'm done here. I'm done chapter 4. So the first half of chapter 4 is pretty much Frodo. They wake up in the Woodhall village. The elves leave. They take the shortcut through the bogs, bushes, the fields, and they end up landing in Mr. Maggot's crop. They see some Black Riders. The Black Riders are on the tail, obviously, because they sense the power of the ring. That's my theory. They end up taking a shortcut, and they end up arriving to Mr. Maggot's farm, and they end up meeting Mr. Maggot, obviously. Right. Frodo said, and his wife, obviously, right? Frodo said nothing. His shrewd guesses of the farmer were rather disconcerting. Well, Mr. Frodo, Maggot went on, I am glad that you've had the sense to come back to Buckland. My advice is stay there and don't get mixed up with these outlandish folk. So Mr. Maggot's saying avoid the people in Buckland, obviously, right? You'll have friends in these parts if there are these black fellows come after you again. I'll deal with them. I'll say you're dead, or I have left the Shire, or anything you like, and that might be true enough. For as it's like as not, it is old Mr. Bilbo they want news of. Maybe you're right, said Frodo, avoiding the farmer's eye and staring at the fire. Maggot looked at him thoughtfully. Well, I see you have ideas of your own, he said. It is as plain as my nose that no accident brought you and that rider here on the same afternoon, and maybe my news was no great news to you. After all, I am not asking you to tell me anything you have in mind to keep to yourself. But I see you are in some kind of trouble. So Mr. Maggot's sensing Frodo is in some kind of trouble, obviously, right? Some kind of trouble. Perhaps you are thinking it won't be easy to get to the ferry without being caught, obviously. So you see, even Mr. Maggot senses that Frodo's journey is dangerous, obviously, right? I was thinking so, said Frodo. We have got to try and get there, and it won't be done by sitting and thinking. So I'm afraid you must be going. Thank you very much indeed for your kindness. I've been in terror of you and your dogs for over 30 years. Farmer Maggot, though you may laugh to hear it, it's a pity, for I missed a good friend, and now I'm sorry to leave so soon. But I'll come back, perhaps one day if I get a chance. You'll be welcome when you come, said Maggot. But now I've a notion. It's near sundown already, and we are going to have our supper. We mostly go to bed soon after the sun. If you and Mr. Peregrine and all could stay and have a bite with us, we would be pleased. So Mr. Maggot wants Frodo and them to stay a night over, obviously, and eat dinner with them, obviously. And so should we, said Frodo. But we must be going at once, I'm afraid. Even now it'll be dark before we can reach the ferry. Again, this is not in the movie, man. They mention Mr. Maggot, but they don't. But all you get in the movie is they mention Mr. Maggot's crops. So they're in his farm, and they hear a noise of a dog and someone yelling, which is Mr. Maggot chasing them, and that's it in the movie, obviously. Again, Peter Jackson had to cut this all out, obviously, right? Even now it'll be dark before we can reach the ferry. Ah, but wait a minute. I was going to say, after a bit of supper, I'll get out a small wagon. I'll drive you all to the ferry. That will save you a good step. And it might also save you trouble of another sort. So Mr. Maggot's offering them a lift on a wagon, obviously, right? Offering the hobbits a lift on the wagon to what? To save them the time of walking also. Frodo now accepted the invitation gratefully to the relief of Pippin and Sam. The sun was already behind the western hills, and the light was failing. Two of Maggot's sons and his 3 daughters came in. So Mr. Maggot has 2 sons and 3 daughters, and a generous supper was laid on a large table. The kitchen was lit with candles, and the fire was mended. The kitchen was lit with candles, and the fire was mended. Mrs. Maggot bustled in and out. 1 or 2 other hobbits belonging to the farmhouse came in. In a short while, 14 sat down to eat. There was a beer and plenty, and a mighty dish of mushrooms and bacon, besides much other solid farmhouse fare. The dogs lay by the fire and gnawed rins and cracked bones. When they had finished, the farmer and his sons went out with a lantern and got the wagon ready. It was dark in the yard when the guests came out. They threw their packs on the board and climbed in. The farmer sat in the driving seat and whipped up his 2 stout ponies. His wife stood in the light of the open door. "You be careful of yourself, Maggot," she called. "Don't go arguing with any foreigners and come straight back." "I will," said he, and drove out the gate. So Mr. Maggot's driving, giving Frodo them a ride, obviously, right, on the wagon. His ponies. "I will," said he, and drove out the gate. There was now no breath of wind stirring. The night was still and quiet, and the chill was in the air. They went without lights and took it slowly. After a mile or 2, the lane came to an end, crossing a deep dike and climbing a short slope up on the high-banked causeway. Maggot got down and took a good look either way, north and south, but nothing could be seen in the darkness, and there was not a sound in the still air. Thin strands of river mist were hanging above the dikes and crawling over the fields. "It's going to be thick," said Maggot, "but I'll not light my lanterns until I turn for home. We'll hear anything on the road long before we meet it tonight." So Mr. Maggot gives Frodo and them a ride, I believe. I might be wrong here. I believe he gives them a ride on his wagon. Obviously, right? Page and a half, and I am done chapter 4. Now moving on to chapter 5, which is a conspiracy unmasked, obviously. I believe chapter 6, you have the Old Forest. In chapter 7, I believe, is Tom Bombadil. Yeah, man. 2 more chapters from now, I'll be reading the Tom Bombadil. Tom Bombadil is an interesting character in the book, obviously. The chapter's pretty boring, but Tom Bombadil is a huge drive because he sings all these songs, man. Bombadillo, 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 you know what I'm saying? I remember that, you know what I'm saying? It was 5 miles or more from Mr. Maggot's lane to the ferry. So Mr. Maggot's taking Frodo and them to the ferry, obviously. The hobbits wrapped themselves up, but their ears were straining for any sound above the creak of the wheels and the slow clop of the pony's hoofs. The wagon seemed slower than a snail to Frodo. Beside him, Pippin was nodding towards sleep, but Sam was staring forward into the rising fog. They reached the entrance to the ferry lane at last. It was marked by 2 tall white posts that suddenly loomed up on their right. Farmer Maggot drew in his ponies, and the wagon creaked to a halt. They were just beginning to scramble out, when suddenly they heard what they had all been dreading, hoofs on the road again. The sound was coming towards them. Maggot jumped down and stood holding the ponies' heads, and peering forward into the gloom. Clip clop came the approaching rider. The fall of the hoofs sounded loud in the still foggy air. "You better be hidden, Mr. Frodo," said Sam anxiously. "You get down the wagon and cover up with blankets." Right? So my guess is that Mr. Maggot is now, they sense that it's a Black Rider, obviously. Hence why Sam's like, "Frodo, hide yourself," obviously. Because the Black Riders can sense in my opinion, the reason why the Black Riders are on their tail is because they can sense the presence of the ring, obviously. That's my personal theory. I could be wrong here. Again, if I comment and make an error, you gotta bear with me, Lord of the Rings fans. Because I'm not as well grounded in Lord of the Rings. But I know you guys love when I read Lord of the Rings, because Lord of the Rings, when I read the book, it brings the world to life and it's a lot more interesting. Every time I watch my videos, I'm like, oh my god, Lord of the Rings is so much more interesting when I listen to myself read it online. Read it on YouTube, right? The fall of the hoofs sounded loud in the still foggy air. "You'd better be hidden, Mr. Frodo," said Sam anxiously. "You get down in the wagon and cover up with blankets, and we'll send this rider to the roundabouts." He climbed down and went to the farmer's side. Black Riders would have to ride over him to get near the wagon. Clop, 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 clop. The rider was nearly on them. "Hello there," called Farmer Maggot. The advancing hoofs stopped short. They thought they could dimly guess a dark cloaked shape in the mist, a yard or 2 ahead. "Now then," said the farmer, throwing the reins to Sam and striding forward. "Don't you come up a step nearer. What do you want, and where are you going?" "I want Mr. Baggins. Have you seen him?" said a muffled voice. So the Black Riders are looking for Frodo, obviously. Again, this is not in the what? This is not in the what? In the movie, obviously. So the Black Riders are now looking for Frodo, obviously, because what? they're now suspicious of the rings because Bilbo said because when Gollum got captured by the enemy, he said Shire Baggins. The enemy is now what? They're aware of the name Baggins, obviously. They're looking for Frodo, obviously. Right? Hello there, called Farmer Maggot. The advancing hoofs stopped short. They thought they could dimly guess a dark cloaked shape in the mist. This is one of the Black Riders, right? A yard or two ahead. Now then, said Farmer, throwing the reins to Sam and striding forward. Don't you come a step nearer. What do you want, and where are you going? I want Mr. Baggins. Have you seen him? Said a muffled voice. But the voice was the voice of Merry Brandybuck. A dark lantern was uncovered, and his light fell on the astonished face of the farmer. Oh, so they thought it was a Black Rider, but they end up finding out it's Merry. So I was mistaken there, obviously, right? I didn't read the rest of the context, obviously. So they thought it was a Black Rider who was following them. But the reason why the Black Rider is following them is on their tail is because they can sense the presence of the ring. They thought it was a Black Rider when in reality it was Merry. Merry dressed up in Merry Brandybuck, obviously. Again, this is not in the movie, obviously, right? Mr. Merry, he cried. Yes, of course. Who do you think it was, said Merry. I was right. In this chapter, they do meet Merry. I told you, Pip and Merry and Sam travel and they meet Merry along the way, obviously. Yes, of course. Who do you think it was, said Merry, coming forward, as he came out of the mist and the fear. So they thought it was a Black Rider when in reality it was Merry, obviously. Right? Subsided. He seemed suddenly to diminish to ordinary hobbit size. He was riding a pony, and a scarf was swathed around his neck and over his chin to keep out of the fog. Frodo sprang out of the wagon to greet him. So you are at last, said Merry. I was beginning to wonder if you would turn up at all day, and I was just going back to supper when it grew foggy. I came across and rode up towards Stock to see if you had fallen in any dishes, but I'm blessed if I know which way you had come. Where did you find them, Mr. Maggot? In your duck pond? No, I caught them trespassing, said the farmer, and nearly set my dogs on them, but they'll tell you all the story. I've no doubt now, if you excuse me, Mr. Merry and Mr. Frodo, and I'd best be turning for home. Mrs. Maggot will be worrying with the night getting thick. So once Mr. Maggot takes Pippin, Sam, and Frodo to the ferry, and they meet Merry, he's now saying his goodbyes, and he's like, my wife is waiting for me, she's worried and sick of me, I'm going to go back home, obviously. Right? So I remember a lot of things. I remember I said in my last video, the shortcut to mushrooms is when they meet Merry and when they meet Mr. Maggot, obviously. And they meet Merry along the way, along their journey, obviously. I told you, the first half is just them walking, talking, camping, and meeting people along the way. That's pretty much the first half of Fellowship of the Ring, obviously. No, I caught him trespassing, said the farmer, and nearly set my dogs on them, but they'll tell you all my story. I've no doubt now, if you excuse me, Mr. Merry and Mr. Frodo, and all, I'd best be turning for home. Mrs. Maggot will be worrying with the night getting thick. He backed the wagon into the lane and turned it. Well, good night to you all, he said. It's been a queer day, and no mistake, but all well as ends well. Though perhaps we should not say that until we reach our own doors. Obviously. I'll not deny that I'll be glad now when I do. He lit his lanterns and got up. Suddenly he produced a large basket from under the seat. I was nearly forgetting, he said. Mrs. Maggot put this up for Mr. Baggins with her compliments. He handed it down and moved off, followed by a chorus of thanks and good nights. They watched the pale rings of light round his lanterns as they dwindled into the foggy night. Suddenly Frodo laughed. From the covered basket he held, the scent of mushrooms was rising. And that ends chapter 4. And now moving on to chapter 5, which is Conspiracy Unmasked. Obviously. Right? So this half of chapter what? The first half of I'm running out of time here. The first half of what? The first half of chapter 4 is pretty much what? The first half of chapter 4 is Frodo and them wake up. They meet the elves, obviously. They wake up in the morning, and then they find the elves are gone. The elves leave them drinks, obviously, in the Woodhall village, obviously. The Woodhall village. They discuss the path they're gonna take to Buckleberry, obviously, to the ferry, whatever it is, to Buckleberry. And then Frodo recommends they take the shortcut, obviously, instead of taking the path of the main road, because the Black Riders are on a tail. They walk through the bogs, the bushes, the fields, all that stuff. They camp, they sing, they hear, they what? They sense that the Black Riders are approaching. Obviously, they hide. The Black Riders are on their tail because they can sense the power of the ring. Obviously, that's my theory. That's why they're on their tail, obviously. They end up taking a shortcut through the fields, the bogs, the bushes, and that leads them to Mr. Maggot's farm, obviously. They're caught trespassing, pretty much. Mr. Maggot invites them to their home, pretty much. They have dinner at his house, and he offers to give them a ride to the ferry, obviously, to Buckleberry or whatever, to the ferry. He offers to give them a ride on his wagon to the ferry. They end up meeting this mysterious black rider. They think it's a black rider, and they find out later on it's Mary. Then Mr. Maggot ends up leaving them, and he goes home, and then that ends chapter 4, pretty much. Like I told you, the first half of Fellowship of the Ring is pretty much them walking, talking, camping, singing, and meeting people on the way. That's pretty much the first half of Fellowship of the Ring. They talk, they walk, the journey. Tolkien goes into what? He goes into his description frenzy, right? Describing all the sunset, the lands, all that stuff. They camp, they sing all these songs. The Black Riders are constantly on their tail because they can sense the presence of the ring, obviously. And they end up meeting people along the way. They already met Mr. Maggot, they met Gildor. You know what I'm saying? Now they met Mary along the way. Whereas in the movies, the Mary and Pippin show up out of nowhere on Mr. Maggot's farm. Whereas in the book, Frodo and them go to meet Mr. Maggot. They trespass Mr. Maggot's farm. Then they end up, Mr. Maggot invites him to his house. They have dinner with his wife and his daughters and sons, obviously. He gives them a ride to the ferry. They end up meeting Mary, who's the mysterious Black Rider, obviously. Who they think to be the mysterious Black Rider, when in reality it's Mary. And then Mr. Maggot leaves them and wishes them well, and that ends chapter 4 pretty much. And now I'm on Conspiracy Unmasked. I don't remember what that chapter's about. Mysterious Unmasked, I don't remember what's that about. Obviously. But I know after that you have the Old Forest. They journey through the Old Forest. And then after they journey through the Old Forest, that's where they meet Tom Bombadil. I'm correct. That's where Frodo and them meet Tom Bombadil. Obviously. So I hope you Lord of the Rings fans are enjoying, which you guys obviously are. I hope you guys are enjoying my Lord of the Rings read-along, as I'll be doing all of book 1. I should get through all of book 1 by perhaps even mid-October. I might get through all of book 1. Perhaps if I pump out videos every day, there's a good chance by mid-October I might even get through all of book 1, man. Obviously, right? I'm gonna shut my camera for a sec.